Hello everybody, my name is Michael from Polygon Island and welcome to how to use shader nodes in Blender. So there will be multiple parts in this video. The timestamps will be on the screen now. Basically we're going to go over just general BSDFs, then we're going to go over texture nodes, and then we're going to go over procedural shading nodes. So let's get right into this. So there are two ways you can access the shading menu in Blender. You can go up here to the very top where it says shading under the tabs right here, and click that, and then it'll bring you to the shading tab. Or what you could do, which is what I do most of the time, is go over to the top left right under the Blender logo, put your cursor right there, it'll turn into this little cross thing. All you have to do is click and then drag, and it will split your window. And not only from here can you access the shader menu, but you can access any other viewport that you want. So the shader editor is the third from the bottom, and it has this little ball and it says shader editor. You can also hit Shift F3 to go into this menu. So clicking the shader editor, what we're going to do is we have the principal BSDF. The principal BSDF is the default shader that comes in your material from Blender. So with the default cube, it already has a material applied, but if you have another object that you add to your scene, let's say a sphere, you can see that it doesn't have a material, it doesn't have that principal BSDF. So to make a material, you can either go down here to the right to this little checker ball kind of thing. This is a material tab, and then you can click new, and you can see over here it creates that material. Also, what you can do is just click new at the top right here. If you don't see it, you can use your middle mouse, click, and then you can move over if that's not in your view for some reason. And clicking new does the same exact thing. You can see it brings it over here too. But I'm going to use a sphere for this. So I'm going to bring this over here, and I'm going to scale it up, Control A, and then apply scale. You don't have to do this. This is just what I'm doing. And I'm also going to give this 2 subdivisions and shade it smooth just for viewing purposes. So I'm going to be using cycles for this, but you can also use Eevee. Eevee is pretty much the exact same in material standards except for any kind of transparent or glass material. Glass materials in Eevee are very complicated, and it's just very finicky for glass in Eevee. So what we have here, if we switch over to cycles, is we have our ball. So you can see with the base material, everything's white. Its roughness isn't very high. You can see over here there's a little bit of reflection off of both these planes and the ball. And let's get started with the principal BSDF. So the principal BSDF, here's your base color. This base color obviously changes the basic color of the mesh. You have your subsurface radius, which you can change from 1 to 0.2 to 0.1. This basically helps with subsurface scattering, how big you want your subsurface scattering to be. And subsurface color. If you're using a subsurface scattering node, you can change this for your subsurface scattering. If you don't know what subsurface scattering is, it's basically seeing the inside of a material. Like if you hold your hand up to a very bright light and you can see the red inside your hand, that's subsurface scattering. It's basically used to make more realistic human faces or stuff like cheese or something. But yeah, metallic, it changes the metallic properties of the metal. You can it's pretty much 0 or 1. There's really no in between. 0 is no metallic, 1 is metallic. So you can see right here it changes the sphere to a more metallic kind of color. And also you can change that with roughness to make it a shinier metal or just a very dull metal. So I'm going to leave this at the 0.5 that it was at and turn this back down. So specular. Specular is how much light the material absorbs. So for example, if I change the color to black right here, you can see that it is reflecting light still. It's not solid black, it still has light reflecting off it. If I change the specular all the way up, it's reflecting more light, and if I change the specular all the way down, it is completely black and it is absorbing all light. So I'm going to put this back at 0.5 like it was. Specular tint is basically just the tint of color that the light reflects. This is black with a white light, so it doesn't really do anything right there. But I'm going to change this back to white. So now we have roughness. Roughness is how rough the object is, how much light it reflects, and how much light it diffuses. So if we change the roughness all the way up, you can see there is very little light reflecting off of it. And if we change it all the way down, you can see that it is very shiny. You might not be able to see it here, but if I turn it all the way black, you might be able to see this. If I also change the plane roughness to all the way down, you can see it a lot better. It's reflecting the ball and stuff right there. So now that we have that, I'm going to change this back to a gray color. And then we have anisotropic. Anisotropic, or anisotropic, whatever it is, it's basically, have you ever seen like pans and they have that weird circular design on the bottom of them? That's what anisotropic is. So we can turn anisotropic on and we can see that it's reflecting this kind of circle on the sphere. Anisotropic rotation controls where at it's reflecting off of on the mesh. And that's really useful for like metal pans, metal objects that have anisotropic on them. And then we have sheen. Sheen basically is really useful for hair or anything that reflects like hair. Sheen is when you look at hair and you have that light reflecting off of them. The light reflects off of the hair and it's shiny, and that's what sheen is. Sheen all the way down has no sheen, and sheen all the way up has max sheen. You can't really see it on this sphere, even if I turn it all the way up, but that's what it does. Sheen tint is the color of the tint. Clear coat, it basically adds a like reflective layer over it, and you can also change the roughness of that too. It basically adds another layer above your object that's shinier or rougher. Index of refraction, this is only used for transparent and glass objects. Index of refraction is how it reflects, or how it, like how see-through it is, how it refracts light. So for example, water is 1.33 and glass is 1.45. Transmission. Transmission is also glass. So if you want a glass shader, you can just change the transmission on the Principled BSDF up, and we can see that we have this glass shader now. Transmission roughness makes the glass rougher, and yeah. Emission, you can change the emission if you want. The emission, this is also basically an emission shader, except instead of just being a complete light source, you can see we still have the object lying underneath. So if you want an emission object but still want to retain its original material, you can use the emission. Turning it all the way black obviously is no emission, and stuff like that. Alpha is how transparent the object is. If you want a transparent object, you can just change the alpha to 0. Want a half transparent object, you can change it to like 0.5, and then no transparency at all is 1. So now, let's get into the other main BSDFs. So the easiest way to see all your BSDFs is you could just hit Shift A and then Shader and you have all these. But what you could also do is go over here to the Material tab, and under Surface, we have all these BSDFs. So Principled BSDF basically has a little bit of all these, except for a few. So I'm going to go through these as quickly as I can. So let's get started. Anisotropic BSDF, it adds that anisotropic that we went over earlier. You have the anisotropy value, you have the rotation of it, and you have the roughness of it. So that's what anisotropy is. It's basically a really reflective kind of thing. But yeah, that's that surface. Next up, we have background. Background is basically just pretty much an emission shader. That's pretty much all I've ever used it for, is just like an emission shader. So if we hide this light right here, you can see it emits light. I don't really know what else this is used for, to be honest with you, but that's what we got so far. Next is diffuse. Diffuse was basically what Principled was before Principled was added as default in Blender 2.8. So diffuse is your basic color material. So pretty much all you can do in this is connect a normal map if you want to. Color, you can change the color of your object, and you can change the roughness of it. So yeah, that's that. The difference about this and the roughness in Principled BSDFs is that this you can't have completely reflective, shiny. You see the roughness is at 0, and it's not like that. So yeah, that's that. And next surface, we have glass BSDF. I've already run over what glass BSDFs are. They're glass, and you have the roughness of the glass if you want like a frosted glass look, or if you just want glass. Index of refraction, right here, you can change how reflective the material is. For example, if I change it to 1.33, this is the refraction of water, and then 1.45 is the refraction of glass. There's a whole you can just look up index of refraction for certain objects if you're trying to get a certain object like plastic or something, and there's a whole list of the index of refraction for different objects. Next surface, glossy BSDF. This is basically mirror shader. If you want to make a mirror, you use the glossy BSDF. You can change the roughness all the way up. That pretty much takes all the glossy away. All the way down makes it a mirror. You can see that it's reflecting everything that's in the scene right now. Next is hair BSDF. Hair BSDF, you can see it does not work very well on my sphere, but this BSDF is used for when you have hair. A lot of times now you use the principled hair BSDF, which is right here, but you can still use this too. Next is Holdouts. I'm not very sure what this does. I'm gonna be honest with you. If anybody does know what this does, please leave it in the comments below. I'll pin your comment. But yeah, it just turns it black. I don't really know what else it does. Next is a mix shader. This shader does not actually apply material to your object. It is for mixing two BSDFs together. So for example, if I put a principled BSDF in here, and then I add a translucent BSDF, which I'll get to later, you can see that it makes it slightly translucent. So that's what a mix shader is. And now on to the next one. So the next one is the principled BSDF. We've already went over that. And then principled hair BSDF. I am on my plane. I did not mean to do that. Principled hair BSDF. You can see that this has a lot more settings than the regular hair BSDF. You can change the roughness of the hair, the radius of the roughness, what kind of coat the hair has, if you want it to have a coat. What this does is it basically just adds another layer like the clear coat did in the principled BSDF. Index of refraction, offsets, which offsets the reflection of the hair. You can see it's moving over there. And then random roughness. This basically makes it to where there's random spots on the shader that are more rough than others. You can see right here, this is more rough. Over here is more rough, and then like through here and stuff, it's shiny. That's what the principled hair BSDF is. And now principled volume. Principled volume, the way this works is you can't have it plugged into the surface of your material output. Volume needs to be plugged into this volume. And what it does is it's basically just volume. It's fog, it's mist, it's whatever you want to call it. Usually this I only use to add volume in my scenes. I'll use a cube and scale it up to cover my entire scene. And then, yeah, that's that. Okay, next material. I should probably change this to surface again. Next is refraction BSDF. This is just refraction of things around you, things in the scene. You can see it's reflecting light. It's not reflecting, it's refracting. And then we can also change the roughness and stuff of this too. The index of refraction, you can change that. And yeah, specular is just basically how it absorbs light. You can change the colors and stuff. I don't really know what this is used for per se. I just know it can be used in mixed shaders and node groups and stuff to add different specularities to your materials. Next is subsurface scattering. So instantly when we print on subsurface scattering, you can see that we can see the inside of this object. So you can change the color to anything you want, and then we can change the scale and stuff. So you can see, we can see inside this object where it's red, it's reflecting light from the inside. I wouldn't really use subsurface scattering as a material node. What I would do is just add a subsurface, or not that. I would use this subsurface scattering with a principled BSDF and mix it together. So that would be that. We can also add blur to it if you want, if you're using a texture on the inside for subsurface scattering, which we'll get into for a little bit, how to connect textures to nodes. But yeah, that's that. Next we have the Toon BSDF, which basically makes it very cartoony. You can't really see it good here, but you can change the size of how cartoony you want your BSDF to be, and then you can change the smoothness, which isn't really making it very smooth here, but that's just because of the subdivisions we have on our sphere. Next, we have the translucent BSDF, which just makes your object translucent. For example, if I take the light and then I put it inside the object, you can see that the light is coming out of the object. It's basically just a really cheap emission shader if you do this, but yeah, it makes the object translucent. You can kind of see through it, but it's not transparent. It's just letting light through it, and that's what translucency is. So transparent BSDF makes the object transparent. You can see now we can see completely through the object. You can also change the color of the transparency if you want. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that shader. Next is velvet. This is good if you're trying to make like a velvet cloth or something, like if you're trying to make anything that was made out of velvet. You can change the sigma of it, which is how light reflects off of it, and you can also of course connect a normal map to it if you want. And next we have volume absorption, which is another volume node. This doesn't really do anything unless you pair it with the volume node itself. Basically these two, the two volume nodes are basically what principal volume is. And then like volume scatter, this is an actual volume node. So you can see pretty much it doesn't really do anything because you have to pair those two nodes together. So if I just type in volume absorption and then add a mix shader and then put these two together, we can see that if we turn down the density, it is now volume. So that's that. It's like a more dense kind of volume, and you have more control over it. So texture nodes are basically all the nodes that you use to add image textures into your scene and connect them to your principal BSDF. So obviously you don't have to use a principal BSDF, you can use any one, but if you just want an image texture yourself, then use the principal BSDF. So if we connect this, we can see that it's back to what we had before in the beginning of the video. And to the easiest way to have a full texture setup is by going to Edit and then Preferences and then Add-ons, and then just typing Node in here and then enable Node Wrangler. Node Wrangler just basically makes nodes, like texture nodes and stuff, a lot easier. You can also control shift click to view them themselves, which is really cool. But yeah, so to add a image texture, I'm actually going to use this plane to add an image texture. So click on the principal BSDF or whatever shader you're using and hit Control Shift and T. If you only have one texture and it's not a PBR texture setup, it's just Control T. Control T just adds one of these image node setups. But let me go ahead and explain this before I add the texture. So the texture coordinates, you have generated, normal, UV, object, camera, window, and reflection. So pretty much the only ones you're going to be using to map a texture are these three: generated, normal, and UV. Generated is just where Blender thinks the texture should go. Normal follows the normal map data of or the normal data of the object to map a texture, and then UV is a UV map. So to UV unwrap, you would hit tab to go into edit mode and click U and then unwrap. I'm going to go ahead and do this to apply a texture. And yeah, so pretty much what you're going to want to do, unless you're using like a very, very basic mesh or like something in the background or something like that, is use UV. If you're using a UV sphere, it's already pretty much UV mapped. You can use generated on that. You should be able to at least. And then mapping, this is basically where the texture, like the position, the rotation, and the size of the texture. And then the image texture node is obviously your actual texture. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these real quick. And because I have a PBR texture setup, so I'm going to hit Control Shift and T, and you can see down here is this principal texture setup. So if I go down to my pictures, I have this ground stuff. So basically just select all your textures. Some of them might be included that don't work in Blender or won't be included, but that's okay. And just click Principal Texture Setup, and you see now we have a complete principal texture setup. And now let me explain some of these nodes that it has added. So normal map. Normal maps and bump maps are basically synthetic detail or simulated detail that the thing has. So if I turn this, so if we look at the object, you can see that it looks like it's bumpy. You can see that right here and stuff, the leaf looks like it's coming up, but in reality it's just a texture data. It's not actually changing the mesh or doing anything like that. And if we change it to 0, we can see that it is now flat again, and it is just a texture. So with that, it's also not flat here. So if we change this to 0 too, there's displacement, it is now just a texture. So I'm going to change this back to 1, and then I'm going to change the strength of the normal map back to 1 as well. So now the displacement node. Displacement node is what actually changes the mesh. This node, you basically subdivide your mesh a ton of times to where it has a ton of geometry, and then this displacement node will displace that geometry. Now, to make it actually displace the geometry on a physical level, you would have to go into your material settings where you have the displacement on, and then settings, and then displacement, change it to displacement and bump. So that's that basically, and that is our texture completely done. And you can see over here we basically have the texture coordinate and mapping nodes connected to all these vectors in the textures. Now, when if you're adding these manually, if you're adding textures manually, you'll notice on color space the color says sRGB, but all the other ones say non-color. And the reason for that is the color data, or the color map, the albedo map, whatever you want to call it, is the only thing giving color data to the texture. Everything else is black and white, or the colors don't matter, and that's very important to set as non-color. If the image isn't supposed to give color data, set it to non-color. It can mess up the color data, it can make the texture look not look right, and just stuff like that. So what I was talking about earlier with the Control-Shift-Click on different nodes to view them, you can basically see, if I Control-Shift-Click on roughness, we can see our roughness map right here. So the grays, blacks, and whites dictate where it should be rough and where it should not be rough. So also the normal map, we can see that, you can see here it's the synthetic detail. It shows wherever things should be sticking out, wherever things should be popping out, and stuff like that. And then displacement map is another black and white texture, and basically the blacks are supposed to be like dipped in and the whites are supposed to come up. I'm pretty sure that's right. It's either blacks are supposed to dip in and whites are supposed to come up, or whites are supposed to go down and blacks are supposed to come up. But yeah, we can also change our normal, we see our normal map node, which gives us more detail on our normal, but it's basically the same thing. We can see where all the bump is supposed to be, and we can click our displacement node, and now we can definitely see where things are supposed to come up at. So these like weird colors right here, obviously those things are really high up in the displacements, and then these little, like this yellow, red, green area is where it's still coming up, but it's not coming up like that much. And then the blacks are just to where displacement isn't affected. So now if I just Control-Shift-Click on my material output again, or the principal BSDF, we can see that we have the texture back, and that is that. Procedural textures. This is the final part in this tutorial, and it's procedural nodes. So procedural nodes are very, very handy. They are basically textures that can be put on pretty much any object. They're not made from any image textures. They're just made from procedural textures inside Blender. So if we go ahead and give this a new material, or our sphere has a new material now, what we can do is we can Shift A and then type in texture. And now we have all these textures right here. So I'm not going to go through all of these because they're pretty much the same, but I'm going to go through a few that are used a lot. So the first is the noise texture. The noise texture basically pretty much does what it says. So it adds noise to the object. So you can see right here all the different colors and stuff are the noise. And yeah, one thing I like doing with noise textures a lot is making a very simple ground material. And the way you would do that is just disconnect the noise texture, add a bump map, and then put the color into the height of the noise texture, and then the normal into the normal of this. So you can see that it adds a bump with the noise texture. You can also change the scale of the noise texture, the roughness of the noise texture, the distortion of it, and just stuff like that. You can also change the detail if you want it to have a lot of detail. But yeah, this is kind of like already like a drywall kind of material. But that's not what we're going over right now, but you can definitely see where the noise texture is being applied on the object. Next texture is going to be a Musgrave texture. So the Musgrave texture, you can put the height into the color, and basically it does this. It adds like just wibbly wobbly effects to the sphere. It's called sphere. It It adds like these like wibbly wobbly effects to the sphere. You can change the scale, detail, dimension, luminarity of this too. Yeah, just different stuff like this. You can change it all, and different stuff like that. So what we can also do is we can also chain these textures together. So you can shift A and then add a noise texture, and then you can put the color into the vector of the Musgrave texture, and you can see now that our noise texture is applying onto our Musgrave texture. So if we disconnect it, you can see it's like this, and then we add that noise to it, and it adds this. And next texture we're going to use, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect these, just move them over here. Next thing we're going to add is our Voronoi texture. Voronoi, whatever it's called. And just the color into the base color of the principal BSDF, and we can see now we have these like cells, this cell kind of thing on our mesh. You can change it to 1D, 2D, or 2D, 3D, and 4D. Basically how many dimensions it has. You can also change F1, F2, just for different styles. Smooth F1. This is basically what the default is, except it's smooth, like it blurs the lines between them. Distance to edge, don't really know what that does. And then end sphere radius, I don't really know what that does. So I'm going to keep it on F1, and we can change from Euclidean to Manhattan, and that changes it a little bit. Instead of making them just sharp corners and lines, it kind of like gives them different shapes. And we can also change it to Chebyshev, which kind of overlays more on top of them. And then Minkowski, which is like a complete mess. But yeah, that's basically what that does. You can also change the scale, randomness, and W. Don't really know what W is. And stuff like that. And once again, you can also chain these together. So you can see now we kind of have this really, really trippy kind of thing going on right here. And also, if you really wanted to, if you wanted to make that something cool, you could add an emission shader. Put the color into the emission shader, and then put this into the surface. And so you can see now that we have this really trippy kind of procedural background kind of thing. So that's pretty cool right there. But yeah, you can do a lot with these procedural nodes. And yeah, but you also have other ones like brick textures. You can just put the color into the color of that. You can see it adds bricks to it. And you can also change the scale, mortar size, bias, brick width, row height, stuff like that. This kind of looks more like wood than it does a brick, but you get the point. So there's tons of stuff you can do with this. You can also pair them with color ramps. Let's say you want a color ramp, right? You put the color into the fac of the color ramp, and then the color into the color of the emission. And it basically, you can up the blacks, up the whites, and also if you want to, you can mix this with a diffuse, and then you could add a mix shader. Put this right here, put the diffuse in the bottom, and then put the color into the fac of the mix shader. And so you can see it's mixing. You can also put the color of this into the emission shader too, but you can see now it is mixing that kind of diffuse with the image. So you can see we can turn this down, and it's mixing the white parts in with this. If we turn it all the way up, we can see that it is now pretty much just the material. So that's pretty much shader nodes, pretty much the beginner shader node tutorial. So if you guys liked it, make sure to leave a comment, subscribe. That would really help me out. But thanks guys so much for watching. My name is Michael from Polygon Island, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.